Hey, it's Lisa from Tinker Creek Hand Knits, and today I'm going to demonstrate 3 different ways to knit with more than one color in a row or a round, also called fair isle knitting. I'm demonstrating this technique using my pattern Britta, which is for a chunky knit beanie in Lion brand thick and quick colors, Fisherman and Raspberry. This is the final product. You can purchase either the final product or the pattern Britta from my Etsy shop called Tinker Creek Hand Knits. Here's the color chart for Britta. If you want to learn how to read this color chart, take a look at my other video, How to Read a Color Chart. So let's go ahead and begin round 1 of this 6-stitch pattern. I'm going to add the raspberry like this. Hold it here, make a tail, loop around the right needle, and finish your stitch, and now it's attached. Now here is one way to knit with more than one color. I'm going to knit the 2nd stitch of round 1, and then I just drop the raspberry, pick the fisherman up for the 3rd stitch in this 6-stitch pattern. That's the 3rd stitch. Now I'm going to drop the fisherman and pick up the raspberry for the next 2 stitches. And then according to the color chart, I have one more stitch of fisherman, so I just drop the raspberry and pick up the fisherman and knit that stitch. And I've completed one sequence of 6 stitches for the pattern. And I'm going to repeat that as I go around round 1. And I'm going to show you a different way to knit with more than one color. So we're going to start at the beginning of the 6-stitch pattern, that's raspberry. And what I'm going to do is hold my fisherman in my regular knitting finger and hand, but I'm also going to pick up the raspberry in my middle finger and hold it like that. I'm holding both fisherman and raspberry in my right hand. So let's follow the chart. 2 stitches of raspberry. I bring my middle finger forward to make the stitch and carry that fisherman yarn right behind me. Now it's time for a stitch in fisherman. So I'm going to bring my index finger around and knit a stitch in fisherman. And now it's time for raspberry again. So my middle finger is going to come around the right needle and knit 2 more stitches in raspberry. And then according to the chart, we have one more stitch in fisherman. All right, and here is one final way, a 3rd way that you can knit fair isle. Holding one hand in your right hand, or I'm sorry, one yarn in your right hand and one in your left hand. Let me show you how I loop it around like that. Let's do it again. Around my middle, around my index. This is how I hold it in my left hand. I think other people hold it different ways. It doesn't matter as long as you get the job done. So I'm going to begin that 3rd 6-stitch pattern, which calls for raspberry. This is how I'm going to knit with the raspberry. I take my right needle, put it through this stitch as if to knit, and I'm going to scoop that raspberry yarn through like that. This is called continental knitting, when you knit with your using yarn in your left hand. Let me try it one more time here. Put through this stitch as if to knit, and then scoop that raspberry right on through and on to my right needle. Now it's time for a stitch of fisherman. So I'm going to ignore the raspberry for a minute, stitch my fisherman, and now 2 more stitches in raspberry. And this is how I do it. Okay, and then one final stitch in fisherman. Okay. Now you don't want to carry the yarn in the back for more than 3 or so stitches. This is a float. This is where I knit with the raspberry and just carry the fisherman along behind. If you try to carry a float for more than 3 stitches with this yarn especially, the float is too long. It can snag and mess up your knitting. So 3 stitches is about the limit, and I'm going to show you how to tack the yarn you're carrying behind. Let's go to round 5 of the Britta color chart. Here we have 5 stitches. Nope, I'm sorry, round 3. Here we have 5 stitches of fisherman with no raspberry. So I'm going to knit 3 stitches in the fisherman, carrying the raspberry in my left hand, because that's how I usually do it. Once again, with the pattern, this is round 3. I have 5 stitches of fisherman, but I'm only going to knit 3 because I really need to tack the raspberry before I go any farther, and this is how you do it. Let me make my 3rd stitch here. Put your needle through the next stitch as if to knit. Then put the needle under your raspberry yarn like that. And then bring the fisherman around and knit and bring the completed stitch to the right hand needle. I'll show you one more time how I tack. Needle through, under the raspberry, the needle is under the raspberry. The fisherman goes around the needle, the right needle, slide. The raspberry is now tacked. So I can go another 3 stitches before I would have to tack it again. Thanks for joining me today. You can find the Britta pattern and the Britta hat in my Etsy shop, Tinker Creek Hand Knits. Happy knitting!